What is good, everybody? Week 4 of the fantasy football season is here, and what that means is more rankings for you guys in these fantasy football leagues. So today I got my top 36 wide receivers heading into week 4 of the fantasy football season. Like I said, if this is your first time at the channel, welcome to the League FFB. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. You don't want to miss any future content and the running back episode that is coming out later today. But without wasting any more time, let's hop right into today's video and let's start talking about these wide receivers. All right, so as you can see, I got 7 tiers pulled up here on the screen as we get into today's episode. That is going to show you guys exactly how I'm viewing these players if you are plugging them into your lineup. So obviously the guys at the top, I'm viewing as elite wide receiver 1s here in week 4, and the guys down at the bottom are more so low-end wide receiver 3s. But like I said, 36 players to get through all of these tiers, so let's just kick it off in the top tier. And I only have 2 guys, and I don't think we need to talk too much about them. It's Amon-Ra St. Brown and Puka Nacua. These 2 players have been absolutely dominant to start the fantasy football season. They're both seeing pretty massive target shares, and they're being used in the red zone and things like that. These players are just plug and play wide receiver 1s, elite wide receiver 1s here in this week's slate, especially in a slate that's lacking CD Lamb. You have the Jamar Chase kind of bumped down the rankings, and some of these other things where it's kind of just hurting a little bit of the wide receiver position, but these are the 2 guys in that tier. Now, the next tier does have 5 players for me. At number 3 is going to be JSN. I have Jefferson, Malik, Nabers, Garrett Wilson, and then I also have Drake London in this tier as well. A couple matchups that I want to talk about in this tier. The first one is going to be that Thursday night football matchup with Jaxon, Smith-Njigba. His target share is massive as well. Going to be a play that I think is a smash play this week. And usually I think those Thursday night games, they don't typically tend to give us a ton of fantasy football points. Maybe that's just, personal bias and there's not real data to back that up. That's just how I feel sometimes with these Thursday night games. But I think he's going to be in a smash spot here this week, and I definitely would be plugging him into the lineup. Malik Nabers is another player that I think is worth talking about. He plays at home with the Los Angeles Chargers. Obviously, we've got the news that Jaxon is now the starting quarterback for the Giants. I have him as a top 5 play. It is a tougher matchup. Right now, the Chargers are ranked 8th against the wide receiver position, only giving up 23.4 fantasy points per game. So this is something I'm going to be watching. There are a couple of moving variables in this game with the new quarterback change and the bad defense and some of the other things like that that he's facing. Now, I say bad defense, more of a tough defense, not a bad defense. That could be confusing. But at the end of the day, I still think he's a top 5 play just because of target share, but there are some things to maybe be considering in this matchup. The other player that I want to talk about is Drake London. He has a very good matchup against the Washington Commanders. Right now, they are ranked 25th against the wide receiver position, giving up 32 fantasy points per game to that position group. So I think he's in a position to get back on track. Hopefully, Michael Penix can play a little bit better because Drake London is a player that we have high hopes for, and I think he can maybe get back on track here this week. I have him as a top 7 play. Let's go to my low-end wide receiver 1s. I have a total of 7 players in this tier. We're going to kick it off with Jamar Chase at number 8. I got Odunze, Nico Collins, Davante Adams, Emeka, Egbuka, AJ Brown, and I have Tetairoa McMillan coming in to round out these low-end wide receiver 1s. Definitely lots of things to talk about here. Jamar Chase is one of the guys that we can talk about for sure. He's on the road at the Denver Broncos, probably going to see some Pat Surtain. Didn't work as good last week with Jake Browning as we thought. This is a bad matchup on paper, only allowing 22.4 fantasy points per game. That's 7th best in the NFL. I'm going to be honest. Jamar Chase at 8 feels low, but I think he can be even lower just based on the circumstances in this game. It's still Jamar Chase, though, and I still think he's going to see a good target share. We know how Jake Browning kind of just looks at him as the first read and the first target that he throws to every single time. It's tough to trust Jamar right now, and this is not a good recipe for fantasy football success here in week 4. But for some reason, I can't get him lower than a top 10 play in my rankings, so take that for what you will. Let's talk about Odunze as well. He's a player who's on the road at the Las Vegas Raiders. This is a good matchup for him. He has been dominant to start the season. Truly looks like the wide receiver 1 for the Chicago Bears. 37 fantasy points allowed is what the Raiders are giving up. That's 29th out of 32 teams in the NFL. I think this is another smash spot for Odunze to continue stacking upon this good start to his season. Nico Collins is another player I want to talk about. This is a good matchup against the Tennessee Titans. They are giving up 34.6 fantasy points per game to that position group. That's 28th in the NFL. Obviously, this is a Texans offense that has struggled a little bit to start the year, but Nico could be in store for a big play touchdown, some extra work, just because the matchup is a little bit favorable for him here this week. Egbuka is a player that's moved into my top 12 12 this week. And the reason why is because Mike Evans is likely going to be out with a hamstring. You'll see, spoiler alert, Mike Evans is not in my top 36 wide receiver rankings. And that's because I'm not expecting him to play here this week. So that's going to be Emeka Egbuka by himself. Probably no Chris Godwin as well. I haven't heard any news about Godwin, but obviously today is the day that we get a lot of the new news. So we'll see what happens later. Once this video comes out, obviously there's going to be some updates. But Egbuka is a player that I'm definitely willing to plug in and play as a wide receiver 1, even if it's a tough matchup against the Philadelphia Eagles. And Tetairoa McMillan's another player that I have here as a fringe wide receiver 1. Good matchup at the New England Patriots. Obviously, New England has been a little bit easier because Christian Gonzalez has been out of the lineup, but they've been giving up 33.8 fantasy points per game. That's 27th best in the NFL. So definitely a vulnerable defense. We'll see what happens this week, but Tetairoa McMillan is a target monster in this offense. And still, even if he's not a, big play type of guy, which I think he is at his core, but even if he's not, he's a volume-based play that you can play as your wide receiver 1 here this week. Let's go to tier 4. Tier 4, I got 6 players in this group. These are my high-end wide receiver 2s. I got Zay Flowers at 15, Ladd McConkey, Cortland Sutton, George Pickens, Keenan Allen, and Tyreek Hill to round out the entire tier. Ladd McConkey is the first player that I want to talk about. Obviously, it hasn't been the start of the year that we've wanted. He gets the game against the New York Giants on the road here this week. This is a good matchup. They're ranked 30th against the wide receiver position. Obviously, you'll see Keenan Allen is in my top 36 rankings. You'll also see that Quentin Johnston's in my top 36 rankings. They spread the ball around. It's tough to know who's going to be the big producer by the end of the week, but I still think Ladd McConkey's a player we still have to play as a high-end wide receiver too. And like I said, the matchup is very friendly for him and the whole wide receiver core here in Los Angeles as a whole. So I'm just going to group Keenan Allen in that same analysis. Obviously, he's been a favorite of Justin Herbert's, but the same things kind of apply for him as far as the matchup goes. And then the other guy I want to talk about is George Pickens. It's a tougher matchup for him. He plays the Green Bay Packers. We know they've been very good against opposing offenses. Right now, they're ranked 4th against the wide receiver position, only allowing 19.9 fantasy points per game. But CeeDee Lamb is not in my top 36 wide receivers this week because I don't think he's going to play because of that high ankle sprain that he suffered. So it's George Pickens as the wide receiver 1. Jake Ferguson's going to see a massive bump. We saw the targets of him last week, but I think George Pickens is in a spot here where he can be a high-end wide receiver 2, but the matchup is tough here against the Packers. Moving on to tier 5, these are the low-end wide receiver 2s, and I got 6 players in this group as well. Starting at 21, it's Ricky Pearsall, Jacoby Myers, Brian Thomas Jr., Davante Adams, Deebo Samuel, and Marvin Harrison Jr. That's the entire group for me. 2 good matchups, 2 bad matchups. Let's talk about them. The good matchups are going to be Ricky Pearsall and Jacoby Myers. For Ricky Pearsall, he's going to be playing at home versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. Right now, they are ranked 26th against the wide receiver position, giving up 33.1 fantasy points per game to the group. I think Ricky Pearsall is starting to trend more and more to the #1 wide receiver in this offense. I think a very talented player, still a player that I think we can be playing as a low-end wide receiver too, but there's still obviously room for boom weeks if you can find the end zone and things like that. Jacoby Myers, Mr. Reliable. It's very safe. Plays against the Chicago Bears, who are ranked 2nd to last in the NFL against the wide receiver position, giving up 38.3 fantasy points per game. I think he's a very safe low-end wide receiver 2 play this week, but obviously he's a player that kind of lacks the ceiling, the ability to boom and win you a week, but he's never going to tank you a week either. So that's why he comes in as my wide receiver 22. Deebo Samuel at my wide receiver 25 is one of the players that has a bad matchup in this tier. It is on the road at the Atlanta Falcons. Right now, they are ranked top 5 against wide receivers, only giving up 20.6 fantasy points per game to the group. And Terry McLaurin is out with a quad injury, or trending to be out with a quad injury. We don't know for certain. He's not in my top 36 yet because we're still waiting on information. But if McLaurin is out, maybe a slight bump for Deebo, but then that just means tighter coverage, harder coverage with AJ Terrell in this offense. So it's going to be tough to know really what's happening with Deebo Samuel this week. I think he's a low-end wide receiver too, and I'd like to see Jaden Daniels get back in the lineup. We don't have any information on that yet at this point in time, but if Jaden Daniels is back in the lineup, maybe a bump for Deebo as well. So he's a player that is sitting here in this tier, but has the ability to move up if a couple of things go his way over the course of the week. The other bad matchup is Marvin Harrison Jr. He plays at home against the Seattle Seahawks on Thursday Night Football. It is a very tough matchup. Seattle has been top 2 against the wide receiver position, only allowing 17.5 fantasy points per game to the group. He hasn't been able to get it back on track. He hasn't been able to see that year 2 breakout that we've been looking for. I don't know if it happens this week, either on a short week. Just not a player that I'm super comfortable throwing into my lineup, but still a player that I'll throw in as a low-end wide receiver 2, maybe a flex play depending on your starting lineups and the sizes of those lineups in your leagues. Let's go to tier 6. Tier 6 is going to be those high-end wide receiver 3s. I have 5 players in this tier. We're going to start it off with Jameson Williams, DK Metcalf, DJ Moore, Chris Olave, and Michael Pittman Jr. 2 players I want to talk about specifically. It's going to be DK Metcalf versus the Minnesota Vikings. That is an international game. The Vikings have been the toughest matchup for fantasy football wide receivers this year, only allowing 14 fantasy points per game to that position group. Obviously, that is a position group that had Odunze, DJ Moore, and then they went out and they played the next week a Drake London and some of these other guys. So it's not like they've been playing bad competition for the start of the season. They've just been a good defense. And so I think DK Metcalf, international game, on the road, things like that, maybe not the best spot to start him if you have him in your fantasy football leagues, but you still can if you have a 3 wide receiver starting lineup or something like that in your fantasy football leagues. I just am tempering the expectations here with Metcalf. There is a good matchup though for DJ Moore. Like I said with Odunze, that matchup against the Las Vegas Raiders on the road there in Las Vegas. They're ranked 29th. DJ Moore has definitely been playing second fiddle to Rome, but I think he's still a player that we can plug in as a wide receiver 3 or a flex play in your fantasy football leagues. And now the last tier is going to be those low end wide receiver 3s. I got a total of 5 players in that tier as well. It's going to be Quentin Johnston, Jordan Addison, Khalil Shakir, Jalen Waddle, and T. Higgins. The same thing that I've said for Keenan Allen, the same thing that I've said for Ladd McConkey, that good matchup against the New York Giants. They're on the road. It's all going to apply to Quentin Johnston as well. Like I said, this offense is just very spread out. It's tough to tell who's going to be who each week. Obviously, you can plug all of these guys in, though, because of how good the offense is. The other player that I want to talk about is Jordan Addison. Obviously, back from suspension, should be plugged into the lineup, resuming that number 2 wide receiver role there for the Vikings. Carson Wentz at quarterback. I think there's a chance that he's a pretty fine flex play here this week. So that's why I have him kind of coming in here as my wide receiver 33. And then the other guy that I want to talk about is T. Higgins. Same thing that I said for Jamar Chase. It's a tough matchup. It's a bad matchup. That applies to T. Higgins here against the Denver Broncos. But T. Higgins is the player that I am the most worried about, I think, in this offense moving forward. You see, he's fallen all the way to the top 36. Like, there's a chance here next week he's not even in my top 36. That's just where we're at with Jake Browning in the Cincinnati Bengals offense. If he's a player that I am sitting on in my lineups, I'm very, very worried about him. I'm probably trying to move him. I'm trying to sell out. I'm trying to do whatever I can not to have T. Higgins on this football team, because I think with Jake Browning under center, Higgins is basically going to be very, very underutilized in this offense, and he's not a player that I can trust in my lineups moving forward. So not the greatest of weeks for T. Higgins, probably not the greatest of scenarios for the rest of the season for T. Higgins either. But there you have it, folks. That is my top 36 wide receivers as we head into week 4 of the fantasy football season. Like I said, the running back version of this video is coming out later today, so make sure you guys are subscribed to the channel. That way you don't miss that content when it does come out. If you found something today informative, entertaining, actionable, you felt like I helped you make a lineup decision in one way or another, do me a favor, hit that like button. It is the best free way to show this channel some support, and go join our free Discord. We do have a free Discord linked in the description, helping you guys with those fantasy football teams 24/7, 365. But with all of that being said, I have nothing else for you guys today, so I will see you on our next episode. But until then, peace out.